This is Techzine Talks on Tour, the podcast about enterprise technology that brings you IT insights and analyses from events all around the globe. We cover everything, everywhere. Visit techzine.eu for more information, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast.
This is Sander. I'm at HP's Amplify Partner Conference, and I'm here with Ian Pratt. He's Global Head of Security for HP Personal Systems. Welcome, Ian.
Hello.
I would like to start with a rather broad approach. So what is the role of a company like HP, or more broadly of endpoints, in the security stack for customers in general?
So at HP, we really see security as a key differentiator for us. It's an area that we've invested in for a long period of time. It was really 20 years ago that we set up the Security Research Lab as part of HP Labs. And there are so many things which we take for granted as regards security in the PC world today, that lab, folks in that lab saw the coming threat, created a solution, worked with the product groups to get it into to HP products, and then beyond that sort of worked to try and drive it as an industry standard, to raise the bar for everyone. And we've had this leadership position, and a few years ago that got broadened, where rather than just worrying about securing the PC platform, we now see it as part of our role to help secure the operating system, the applications, and the user data too. So that's really expanded what we do. Yeah. So we still have a lot of focus on the hardware, but also security software and services, which we offer not just on our own PCs, but on PCs from other vendors, helping so we can support the whole of the customer's estate.
Yeah. And I'm guessing there will be listeners now who say, well, okay, but there are lots of existing endpoint protection kind of software stacks that are already on the market. What do you add as HP to this layered security stack?
Yeah, so there are a number of areas where we have really differentiated capabilities, some of which are enabled by the fact that we're building the hardware. So we can actually create custom silicon that we build into the hardware, or where we work with our silicon partners, Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm, to build in capabilities to those CPUs that we can then take advantage of with our software. And so that's a big part of what we do. And it means that we can take a different approach from traditional security software vendors. And so what I would say is in the SMB world, we can offer a complete solution for customers' endpoint security needs. In the enterprise world, it's more about sort of augmenting what customers have. All customers have, antivirus and EDR or MDR services, but we have capabilities which are, differentiated and unique, which add to what they have and solve the problems of, security of the hardware itself. Or
I assume you can send that data, your telemetry, to other solutions as well, right? So you can actually add that to the stack in general.
Absolutely. I mean, these days, customers expect everything to be integrated. They want to have a single pane of glass where all of their security events are flowing through to one place. And, we absolutely work with partners to provide that.
And do you see an impact of the shift towards more platform approaches to security rather than the old, not necessarily old-fashioned, but endpoint focus, right? You hear lots of EDR vendors going to XDR and going to lots of other platform plays. Do you see an impact on how customers or how the market perceives endpoint security?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the case that you want to be able to follow events, across, not just a single endpoint, multiple endpoints, and perhaps where it's looking where that threat interacts with your Active Directory or with things on the network. And it's important to enable all of that information to be pulled together, and that's what everybody is doing either through buying whether it's XDR products or using just the capability to pull the information together, whether it's into a SIM tool or
Yeah, you
Splunk.
still need all the endpoint information and telemetry anyway, right? So that's never going to go away, even though there's maybe not as much focus on it from a pure security perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things you have to, people sometimes forget is that if you look at how breaches play out, in over 70% of the of breaches, it's the endpoint is the point of entry for the attacker. The endpoint is where you've got the coming together of vulnerable technology and fallible users. And vast majority of these attacks, the attacker lures a user into clicking on something, which exposes vulnerabilities on their machine to attack, and then having compromised that machine, it's then the launching point for moving across the enterprise. And if we can keep that initial compromise from happening, then we can keep the enterprise safe. So there's a big role for endpoint security still.
And just shifting gears a little bit, because we have to move on, even though it is very interesting. What is the biggest challenge at the moment around endpoint security in general?
So I think one of the things we've seen, which is we're beginning to start seeing have real impact, is that the bad guys have been quick to adopt generative AI technologies, and we're seeing a real surge in phishing email, the lure emails luring people to click on things that have sort of perfect English. In fact, we're actually seeing...
Not even English, right? Other languages as well.
Indeed, and I think that's a particular problem for some of the Nordics countries where folk, have perhaps been conditioned to think that if something comes through written in, in Danish or, their local language, that it's probably okay.
It's also much easier to have to put the triggers in for people to actually click, right? So you can ask it, please make it relevant for someone from Copenhagen or from Oslo or whatever.
Well, that's it. It used to be the case that you might have to have you'd have to have a human to actually research a victim if you wanted to create a targeted attack, whereas now you can just have generative AI research someone on LinkedIn or social media and then be able to create a customized email which they're more likely to click on. Also, another area which we're seeing happen is if having compromised one machine and having access to a user's email inbox, look at all of the people they're communicating with, and then take the context from those email exchanges and then use that information to then compromise people on the other end of that those conversations, or even look in the directory to find out the next person to attack in that organization with emails appearing to come from the user of the machine you've just compromised.
And it's extremely hard to detect.
I think it's basically impossible as a human to.
Well, I know of some companies that have some of the phishing email kind of detection capabilities.
Yeah, but it's getting increasingly harder for them to do that.
Even though Gen AI has some telltale signs that it's probably.
It does right now, but already we're seeing with each new iteration that we're seeing the language become more natural. There were certain phrases which are a bit of a giveaway for ChatGPT, but those same phrases don't crop up if you're looking at output from Llama or a Gemini. And so expecting that you can detect generative AI just by looking at an email, I think it's not going to hold for much longer.
No. And as HP, I've known about your ESC kind of component inside inside laptops for a while. With the new generation, you've also improved on that chip as well, but that's not used for those purposes in general, right? To combat, for example, the Gen AI generated kind of stuff.
Yeah, so that's quite separate what we do with that chip. It's it's our 5th generation of security controller chip that we've announced and are building into our commercial PCs from March. And Yeah, we released the first generation of that chip back in 2013. We're now up to our 5th generation. Over the last few years, we've seen Apple come out with the T1 chip, Google come out with the Titan security chip. So, other vendors are now sort of catching up and having their own security chips. But we're up to our 5th generation, still in the PC world.
And just to be clear for listeners thinking, what is this chip? What does it do? It is the chip behind things like Sure Start and Sure Run. All that stuff that keeps your firmware uncompromised and all that.
Yeah, it's a chip which is powered on even when the machine appears to be off, and it's what enables the PC to say be managed even when if you leave your PC in the back of a taxi and you want to contact it over an IoT wide area network to be able to lock the device or to wipe it or turn the GPS on and find out where it is. That's the chip which is providing that capability. But also, whenever you press the power button, one of the things it does is to validate that the firmware hasn't been compromised, that hasn't been tampered with, and that it's running genuine firmware. And crucially, if it does detect a problem, it can always get a pristine version of the firmware put back onto the CPU. So that's one of our promises, is that the machine always gets back to a clean state.
But that's been in the ESC chip for probably since the inception.
Yeah.
What's new is, I think, from what I understand, is that you're actually adding some more features, or maybe not call them features, but more capabilities of the chip, maybe also towards cryptography and things like that, right?
Yeah. So that chip, one of the things that chip's always been responsible for is checking that the firmware hasn't been tampered with. And one of the capabilities we announced as part of that 5th generation security controller chip is support for quantum-resistant cryptography. So the reason that's important is obviously, right now there are a lot of organizations across the world racing to build a quantum computer, and some of them making quite good progress. And one of the things that you can do with a quantum computer is implement something called Shor's algorithm. That enables you to factor very large numbers in a relatively short amount of time, which is something which has not been possible before. All of the cryptography we use today for checking, signatures on documents, on transactions, or the signatures on software, also for checking that the website is the website you think it is. It's all built on the fact that factoring prime numbers or factoring large numbers is very hard. If that's suddenly not the case, all of that cryptography fails.
But isn't it the case, correct me if I'm wrong, that AES 256 is still quantum proof?
Yeah, so AES that's an example of a symmetric key algorithm. But before you can use an algorithm like AES, we have to agree on what the key is. And the way that is done today is using what's called public key cryptography or asymmetric key cryptography. And it's those algorithms that rely on that factorization problem. And and if that suddenly becomes possible for people to break, all of those schemes cannot be relied upon. And that's where we're seeing the new cryptographic algorithms being developed right now, which are quantum resistant, that even if you had a quantum computer, because they use a different mathematical property, then they're going to still be secure even in the presence of a quantum computer. Yeah. And the reason why it's important for things like PCs is some of the PCs that we're selling today are going to be in use for many years, maybe not the desktops and laptops, which perhaps have a 3 or 5 year lifespan, but increasingly with circularity, that is going to be longer. But some of these systems end up getting used in retail, which might have a 10-year lifespan, or end up in doing OT control functions, in factories and critical infrastructure. And they may have very long lifespans. And if somebody comes up with a quantum computer, one of the things that they're likely to do with it fairly early on is to break the signature use to sign firmware updates.
And just to get this straight, what does ESC do now in this 5th generation to prepare yourself for that situation?
Yeah. So it implements one of these new quantum-resistant algorithms, such that all of our firmware updates will be signed with signatures using this quantum-resistant algorithm, so that even if somebody breaks a traditional RSA or elliptic curve signature, then the security is still going to be assured, because they won't be able to use the quantum computer to break this new signature.
Okay. And so what does this mean for end users or for organizations looking to protect themselves against this future threat, which isn't necessarily there yet? Can you give us, just to close this off, this conversation, can you give us some first steps that you can take as an organization just to prepare yourself for this eventuality? Because I think somewhere in 2035, we expect, or 33, we expect quantum computers to actually be able to break traditional cryptography in a substantial way.
Yeah, I don't think, no one knows what the real timeline is going to be. There's a lot of uncertainty around it. Could happen sooner, could happen later.
You mentioned, they're making quite big strides nowadays towards...
Yeah, and I certainly meet organizations at Global 2000 companies where they now have somebody assigned who is responsible for their transition to post-quantum crypto, quantum-resistant crypto. And part of that is looking at their own use of cryptography within the organization and looking at how they would migrate to quantum-resistant cryptography, but also looking at all of the infrastructure they use, all of the various suppliers they have, and all of their dependencies on cryptography. And we are now seeing how a number of governments are beginning to give direction on that. We're expecting the U.S. government in 2025 to start requiring procurement to consider quantum-resistant algorithms. So some of these key long-lived capabilities, like if you're buying hardware that has got that, the cryptography built into the hardware, you don't want to have to replace that hardware because someone's built a quantum computer. You want to be ready for that. Is
this something that you need governments or to actually take action on before it actually gets interesting enough or crucial enough for organizations to do something about it? Or do you expect some sort of a natural...
I think we're seeing a mixture. I think as I say, security mature Global 2000 companies, many of them are already beginning to worry about this, building plans for how they're going to make that transition. And then governments themselves are saying, for their own equipment purchases, they want to see this quantum resistance. And of course, organizations will do the work for selling to government. That's going to enable the raise the bar for all organizations. Yeah. So it's a mixture.
Yeah. And just to close off, because we talked a little bit about Gen AI, but we didn't really touch on AI itself with the AI-based PCs, because these new chips are going to be part of the new lineup of AI PCs. Does the AI that's in the new lineup in any way augment or help the goals of the ESC chip in general?
I would say it's kind of orthogonal to what we're doing on the ESC, but obviously we are using those NPUs for security purposes. We've got a lot of our security capabilities use machine learning today. If we're taking advantage of the NPU, we get to run bigger ML models than we could have done on the CPU, which gives us more capability. But also we're seeing how there are lots of software vendors that are wanting to take advantage of the NPU, perhaps to save compute costs in the cloud, but also because customers are wanting not to send that sensitive data to the cloud, be able to take advantage of inference on the endpoint. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of potential there for us to make AI more private and more secure, more trustworthy, taking advantage of that local compute.
Okay, that sounds interesting. I'm really curious to see where this goes from here. I mean, what the 6th generation of the chip is going to bring, and we're going to progress and eventually get there, hopefully, towards a secure future. Thank you very much, Ian, for this insightful conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks, Anna. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Techzine Talks on Tour. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. If you'd like more information, please feel free to visit techzine.eu, where we cover everything, everywhere. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again on the next episode of Techzine Talks on Tour.